On behalf of the deacons, clergy, staff, and members of Plymouth Church, I welcome all of you here. I do want to remind those who are tuning in, you will have an opportunity to pose questions during this conversation. I hope, however, you would please pose those questions in the Q&A function as opposed to the chat function. It's easier for us to collect those questions if you put it in the Q&A. I know sometimes we have that ongoing conversation in the chat, but we want to make sure we get to see your question, and you can help us do that. Before we get started on that conversation with the Attorney General, I just want to offer a special thank you to Plymouth's Racial Justice Initiative, some of members who are sitting here. I'm so glad that they are continuing this work of keeping the conversation going. I also want to thank those who are on our Reimagining Community Safety Committee. I want to thank Ann Manning and Bob Iverson, co-chairs of the Racial Justice Initiative, Seth Patterson, our Minister of Spiritual Formation and Theater, Emily Vanell and Doug Freeman, who are ministry assistants here, and Cody Bordeaux, our production manager, who is going to be helping us out, monitor the questions and keep this going. I don't think Attorney General Keith Ellison needs much introduction. We know him. He's a friend of ours. I've known him both in Washington, D.C. when I was previously there. Right. And when I moved here, he became my congressman. And so we're very familiar with him. But I think it's important to say, what I think is so impressive about our Attorney General is his passion for justice in every facet of work, trying to bring some measure of justice to vulnerable people. He's in the discussion, the debate, and in making it happen. And I'm so happy, and I couldn't be happier that he's here with us today. So if there are no other housekeeping things, we're going to get right to it because we know there's a lot to learn in this conversation. Attorney General, thank you for being here.
Oh,
I want to start off with a very general question just to get a sense of from someone who's been in the middle of it all in the last few years. You know, we've been having discussions about police accountability. We've been debating the appropriate response to authority of law enforcement over response to public safety. We've had an election recently that answers some of those questions. I just want to get it from your vantage point. Where do things stand now? We're sort of letting the rest of the world know what's going on in the Twin Cities and what's going on in Minnesota. Where are we? What is your read on our situation?
Well, I think that we're in a place where we still have an opportunity to do quite a bit of the ideas that were proposed in the run-up to the last election. Mm-hmm. We've seen the mayor say that, hey, it makes sense to try to pull together traditional policing under the same roof as, violence prevention and nonviolent violence interrupters and mental health professionals, and to try to get a more of a coordinated, comprehensive response. Mm-hmm. The mayor said he would do that. And I think, so we have where we are now is we have an opportunity to do what we all agree on. Mm-hmm. And, yes, got 44% of the vote. That's a substantial amount. I think even though no prevailed, you can't really just dismiss 44% of the city.
Right.
And then, but the truth is a lot of the no people that I talked to said, hey, we're not saying that there aren't changes that need to be made. Mm-hmm. A lot of the no people told me that they did want to see changes. And so let's do it.
Yeah.
Right. Where we are nationally is that Congress has failed to act. Congress, Cory Booker, Karen Bass, members of Congress did all they could on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Ultimately, Tim Scott and Senate Republicans just said no. And so where we are is nowhere. Mm. And at the state, there have been a number of provisions that passed, not all, but some, banning chokeholds, reform on the arbitration process, there's a number of things that happened. Didn't bring a list this evening, but there are a number of positive reforms. And I think that, we're in a moment where we may not change the charter. We've decided in the city not to do that, but we have not decided that the status quo is adequate.
Right. And that raises the question, you just talked about some of the things that the city can do. What could the state legislature do? They have done a few things, but nothing that rises to, say, an example for the nation. After George Floyd died, we became, I'll use the word, we became ground zero for discussions of public safety and police accountability. We became ground zero for the rest of the world about discussions of racism and racial disparities. And nearly a year and a half later, I don't think anyone can point to us and say we gave an example of how to move forward. Why can't we? What's holding us back from that?
Well, what is leadership? Leadership is, here's one definition. There are many. Leadership is this: the willingness to reach for an uncertain future because the status quo simply isn't working, as opposed to the unwillingness, the attachment to the unjust status quo because these future is uncertain, right?
Yeah.
And some people, they need to know every single step before they'll take a single step. And this is just kind of embedded in the way human beings are risk averse, right? People have often said, it's the thing that I know. So even though it's not great, we're just going to stick with it. And that's just how we do things. I also think that, it is important to understand that the status quo is not so great.
Right.
I mean, look, in the last year or so, we paid $20 million out when Justine Rushtek was murdered. We paid $27 million when George Floyd was murdered. There have been many other cases. I think we paid $70 million over the last, few years or so. And it's not just Minneapolis. I mean, Los Angeles probably paid, I don't know, they paid like maybe over $100 million over the last 10 years. New York too, Illinois too, many other localities. United States municipal governments have paid a lot of money to compensate victims of police misconduct and excessive force. Money that could have gone to swing sets for the playground, lights, all kinds of things. The money could have gone into better, more humane policing strategy. Could have gone into body cams, not just excessive force complaints, but also we do know that in America, we can see you have a chronically tragic relationship between police and community, and inevitably some tragic event happens, protests, civil unrest, and then we inevitably do some sort of a study, and then we don't do anything with the results of the study. So, I mean, if you look at, there was a 1919 Chicago riot study.
Oh, yeah.
So if you all study the Chicago riot of 1919, what happened is a black kid was swimming in Lake Michigan, floated into the white section of the beach. People started throwing rocks at him. He drowned as a result of their action. Some black parents said, "Aren't you police going to do something about it?" They said, "You better get out of my face. You people, are not entitled to respect or decency." And then there was some violence and civil disruption, and that happened in 1919. And University of Chicago, 1922, issued a report talking about police community relations. Well, same thing happened in Harlem in 1935. Again in Harlem in 1943. Don't forget the McCone Commission in 1967 out of the LA riots. And then the Kerner Commission, 68.
Yeah.
And then, well, look, we've had plenty since then. The Christopher Commission did something after the Rodney King.
That's right.
And then we can't, and then after Ferguson, Obama presided over 21st century policing.
That's right.
And so we have tragic situation, erupts in some horrible condition, civil protests, civil unrest. And how much does that cost? I mean, we burned, the collective, the big we, 500 buildings burned down on Lake Street.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the business case for the status quo?
Right.
I mean, everybody's insurance premiums go up. Buildings, assets, public assets destroyed.
Right. And some businesses will never come back.
Some businesses will come in. Well, let me just take, for example, guy immigrated from Bangladesh, loves to make some delicious food in the tradition of his society. His place is called Gandhi Mahal.
Yes.
Burned to the ground.
Yes.
You cannot go and get his delicious chutney, you can't go get his mango lassi, burned down. Will he come back? I hope so. Yeah. But the bottom line is, what if we just address this issue of police misconduct? What if we just said we're gonna do something about it? And by the way, what about the cops, who I believe are the majority, who really do want to protect and serve?
Right.
I mean, after this tragic incident, you had 14 officers write an open letter saying we condemn what Derek Chauvin did and we want to stand with the community. Imagine going to work with somebody who uses excessive force while you're trying to protect people.
Right, right.
That's got to be tough.
Right.
There's a story about a woman named Carrie L. Horn. For the listeners, I'd like to direct them to Carrie L. Cariol Horn, a black woman police officer serving in the city of Buffalo 15 years ago. She and her partner go in to make an arrest, and she arrests her person without incident. Her partner begins brutalizing the suspect in custody. She says, hey, we got him.
Right. He
punches her in the face. And now you're going to think, well, he probably got in a lot of trouble. No, she got in a lot of trouble. He claims that she interfered with a lawful arrest and she gets fired. And if not for some lawyers at Harvard University who took the case up pro bono and some lawyers at Kirkland and Ellis law firm, she would have never gotten her pension back. Carrie L. Horn intervened to stop excessive force of her partner. Oh, and by the way, her partner was totally a bad egg. He ends up getting convicted of a crime separately in a completely separate event. And, and she, went on to lead the life of a person who is a responsible and a law-abiding. So, I mean, I guess my point is the status quo isn't that good, right?
Right.
But we're not sick of it. We're not tired of it. We don't want to. We're still okay with spending lots of money in payouts and civil unrest every few years. And I think that we should. It's time. So let me just also say this. I believe that our system of policing that is the prevailing norm right now is a model that we built in like the 1920s, 30s, right, across the United States. A time in American history when we had sundown towns, racial covenants, yes, segregation. Well, in the 1960s, we decided as a society to move to a multiracial society. Passed the Voting Rights Act, passed the Civil Rights Act, passed fair housing, passed the immigration bill that was allow people from Asia and Africa and Latin America to come here too. So that was an important shift in our country, right, but we didn't shift policing. Right. And so I think that we need to say that we need an updating in our system.
The idea of the status quo is resonating with me. It's the, and again, I live in North Minneapolis.
Me too.
And
I see you and your husband walking around.
Right.
Going down to the river.
I talk to my neighbors about the elections and what they were concerned about. And it struck me that regardless of where they landed on the question, the status quo was untenable for them.
Right. We agree on that.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, when we were having that discussion, and again, I want to make clear that, just talking to your neighbors are just responding to what's going on around. They just want to be safe. They want a reliable police force. But when we were having this debate, there was this tendency to distinguish between community violence, crimes among citizens in the same neighborhood, especially
private citizens committing acts of violence against each other.
And then state violence, use of force by authorities. And it always lines up this way. Those who wanted more police accountability tended to place emphasis on state violence. Those who who are okay with the status quo or supporting the police usually place the focus on community violence. That seems very disheartening to me, because how can we have a robust discussion about ending violence, a substantive response to both community and state violence?
Well, we absolutely have to, but let me just pose this question to you. Do you remember the scene of the Bouquet of humanity assembled on 38th in Chicago, calling for Derek Chauvin to get up off of George Floyd, check his pulse, get off of him. He cannot breathe. You had black people, white people, old people, young people. You had a bouquet of humanity, Jerry Blackwell called them. And none of them knew George Floyd.
Right.
One of the people there was a 9-year-old girl. Now, in 20 years, let's just say she sees community violence happening in her neighborhood. What's her, do you guess, willingness to call the police after what she saw?
That's right.
What, I mean, we all can answer that question for ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is, if you have a community that has an ambiguous relationship, tortured relationship with their law enforcement, the people who's dedicated to protect them, if they're not sure, if there's distrust, if they associate the people who are to protect and serve them with violent action themselves, extrajudicial illegal action themselves, when they are facing trouble, who are they going to call?
Right.
They may call the police, they may not. Now, here's the other question. Do the people in the neighborhood who actually mean harm to their neighbors, and I'm talking about the private citizens.
Yes.
I'm talking about the people who are like crooks. They're violent people. They take what they want. They don't care. They're comfortable with shooting guns in the neighborhood. They harm their spouses. They harm their family members. They sell illegal substances. They do these things. Do they not know that the community has a tortured relationship with law enforcement? Of course they know. They're not stupid. They're just criminals. So my point is that they're like, well, we know this is like a great place to do whatever we want to do. And so what the net result is, the tortured relationship between police and community is a facilitator of violent crime by private citizens. We need to understand you cannot, it's not like, you know what, we got to support, we just got to back the police no matter what they do, or else we won't have anybody to deal with the violent crime. No, we've got to get a better relationship with police so that we can deal with the individual violent criminal element. And it's out there. Look, man, I spent 16 years as a criminal defense attorney. I spent, and I'm proud to uphold the Constitution, Sixth Amendment rights. Now I'm a prosecutor. I'm very well aware that there are people who don't mean their neighbors any good. Let's just say that that's a fact, right?
Yeah.
Are they doomed to that only? No. I've met some who changed. I've met some who did it because they were in desperate circumstances. I've met some who did it because they were addicted, desperate, whatever. There are a lot of reasons, but it does occur, and only the naive don't want to acknowledge that. But my point is, the way to deal with that problem is not to say we can't address state-sponsored violence that is targeted. We've got to actually deal with both. and I give you an example on the flip side as to how when we do build a relationship, things can get better. There, you know very well, Reverend Jerry McAfee. You probably know all about the 21 Days of Peace effort.
Yes, absolutely.
So some black pastors say, you know what? Since it looks like some members of law enforcement have gotten blue flu, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Since it seems like they've gotten blue flu, not saying they did, just seems like they did. They have. And even there's videotaped evidence to prove that some of them think so.
I saw that. Yeah.
So we're gonna go out there to these hot spots. What did they do? They went to Charlie Adams, the inspector of the 4th precinct, the one we live in.
Right.
And they said, Charlie, who's a relationship, they have a relationship with Charlie. They said, give us all the hot spots. Tell us where the hot spots are. And he said, well, on this corner, you know, we had 3 or 4 shootings last night. On this one, we got some domestic violence. Over here, this is happening. And the folks said, great. And they got lawn chairs and they just sat out there.
Yes.
And they were there. And Charlie Adams came back to say, we had a 3% reduction here, a 50% reduction there, 12% reduction there, because what self-respecting crook wants an audience of church folks.
Right.
You know, they don't.
Right.
They're like, oh, this is not a good place to do what we do.
Right.
And so now you could even argue, well, it just displaced it. Yeah, but every time you displace it, it's tougher to get it going again.
Right.
Displacing it and keeping those folks who want to keep mayhem up on the run is a good anti-crime strategy. So my thing is, when we do find a willing partner like Charlie Adams and some willing community members like those folks with 21 Days of Peace, and there is cooperation, we can actually make the neighborhood a little safer. And so that's the real answer here, right? Community-led initiatives cooperating with members of law enforcement who actually do respect the community. By the way, Charlie Adams was one of the people who signed, one of the 14 officers who signed that letter. And so, you know, look, we all have colleagues. And you think police don't know that there's some people who have no respect for the people they're hired to protect and serve? I mean, Derek Chauvin had, how many complaints he have? 17 complaints. He got, by the way, when the federal government indicted him, they indicted him for a 2017 event where he had brutalized some 14-year-old kid. So this guy, you think his colleagues don't know that he's gonna hurt somebody?
Right.
They know. Right. I mean, Bob Kroll, who was head of the police union, used to boast about all the police excessive force complaints he got. Yeah. We need, I am a very firm believer that we also need 2 things to improve police-community relations. Improve police-community relations, reduce payouts.
Yes.
Just make things better. We need to fire criminal officers who commit crime. No, not fire them, prosecute them.
Yes.
We need to prosecute people who commit criminal acts.
Right.
And we need to fire people who are bad at their job.
Yes.
And what you're gonna have left is a group of people like, hey, I'm here to help, you're here to help, let's all go help. And that's most of the officers. And I mean, there is this 80-20 rule where if you look at all the excessive force complaints, it's not most officers. You have they're concentrated in like 20% of them got 80% of the complaints, right? So, I mean, that's the problem. So you've got to, I think this moment where the Minneapolis is down a lot of police should use this moment to get rid of some of these folks who, because they do spoil the rest.
They do spoil the rest.
They do spoil, because like, do you really want to be the one who's like, that so-and-so is Mr. Goody Two-Shoes. He's telling on us, we can't trust him. Remember what happened to Serpico, right? You ever watched it,
Yes.
So you've got to get rid of the bad ones. And you've got to prosecute the ones that are criminals, and you've got to get rid of the ones, and then you've got to praise the ones that are good.
Yes.
You've got to say thank you. We appreciate what you're doing. And let me tell you, you will solve your recruitment problems, because police right now got a recruitment problem. A lot of young people don't want to be police officers because the reputation of the profession is taking a hit because of people like Derek Chauvin, and we need people who go into who want to protect others. Right. So those are just a few thoughts.
Well, I am so glad you mentioned the 21 Days of Peace. did have the privilege of sitting down with some of those pastors from North Side and had a little discussion about it. And I will admit I was one of the ones who doubted what the impact can be. But most recently, just hearing from you, but hearing from them, it did something that I think is needed, a real focus beyond the debate or at least the political debate around what we were just, the 21 Days of Peace was not used that way.
Yeah.
People really looked at that experience. But it also raised the question for me, you said it earlier and I wanted to go back to it, support for the government structure change or question one at 52% is not an unqualified mandate for policing as usual.
Right.
So it's just a little bit. And then the 44% support for some kind of a public safety department or question two does suggest that you have a sizable number of people who are interested in some alternative ways of doing this.
Yeah.
And so to me then, that seems to suggest that, we do have some kind of room for a mix of responses.
Absolutely.
That, is there a meeting in the middle around these? What does that look like? Can we get, all of the people on all sides of that question who are all talking about the same thing, meeting somewhere in the middle on it?
Well, I think absolutely the answer is yes. I would like to tell you that last week, I'm not sure which day it was it Thursday? Last Thursday, some yes people and the no people met at Ian Bethel's church.
Oh, okay.
I think Ebenezer, is it? I'm not sure. Southside church, just like this, a little closer to the highway. And met in the basement. And I was like, well, what can we do?
All right.
And they committed to continue to meet, come up with what everybody can agree on, and then say, hey, this is what we want. And we want the council to pass it. So those conversations need to continue. I think just because the yes and the no people are not the only ones who get a right to discuss this.
Right.
Honestly, I think the Plymouth family here could get down and say, well, let's get a side-by-side together. And I can even share a side-by-side that I did with you. The yes people want this. The mayor wants this. Some other folks say they want this. And let's just mix and match and figure out how to get an ordinance together that can get through the council. Now, you can't get rid of the minimum staffing thing without a charter change.
Right.
But you probably can set up a comprehensive office of public safety.
Yes.
Right now. And so let's just do that. I mean, the bottom line is if you talk to a police officer who's dedicated to service, and like I said, most are, they will tell you that most of my calls are not, some SWAT team thing.
Right.
I mean, we're not delivering high risk warrants with full regalia, shields and helmets and all of that stuff. We don't do that every day.
Right,
we don't. And some people who do it every day, that's all they do, and it's a big city. Most officers don't encounter an intense level of violence. Most officers' encounters are a lot like the George Floyd matter. Fake $20 bill. Hey, what happened? What happened? Give him back his money. I didn't know it was a 20.
Yeah.
I mean, most of them are not that intense and not, made for TV, and so why don't we get people who are we don't need armed agents of the state to deal with the homeless encampment. We need some social workers to deal with the homeless encampment. We need some mental health workers. We need some chemical dependency treatment people. That's what we need at the homeless encampment. These are not criminals. These are people with nowhere to live.
Right.
And yet we're clearing them out, right, with police officers. Do we really need to go deal with the fake 20s with an armed agent of the state? Do we really? I mean, there's so many things. I mean, me and John Harrington, who's the Commissioner of Public Safety for the state, a year before George Floyd was killed, we commissioned a group called the Working Group on Reducing Deadly Force Encounters with Police. We decided to do our work outside of a crisis.
Right.
Because this stuff is always prompted by a crisis.
Yeah.
And so we met, we got Black Lives Matter people, we got ACLU people, we got police union people, we got Chief Arredondo, we got folks from Greater Minnesota, because their situation is different. I mean, Arredondo can afford to let 4 or 5 people off to go to a week-long training. The chief in Corcoran, if he sent 4 or 5 people to training,
Right,
he has no police department for a week. So not everybody's the same. You can't just do a one-size-fits-all. But we got them all around this table, and we came up with 23 solid recommendations that we could do. And many of them we've already done. I mean, one of them was people would complain that when there was a tragic incident involving a loved one and an officer involved in custody death, they didn't have any information. So Harrington says, I'm hiring a communications officer, you know what I mean? And a family liaison. That's there. If you have the great misfortune to have a loved one die in officer custody, and I hope you never do, but if you do, there's somebody there whose job it is to keep you informed and on the proceedings on what this thing happens, on how to get involved with the State Board of Reparations. If you have problems of affording the funeral, you know, things like that. You know, and there are a number of other things that we adopted, and many of which were carried by members of the state legislature, passed into law. So, I mean, the thing is that there's room to move better, move forward, and we've got to seize that moment. This is an important moment, like you said, and I agree with you entirely. The world's looking at us. The world wants to know, what are we going to do? Do you know, Reverend, I was in Lisbon, Portugal, maybe about 6 weeks ago, 4 weeks, you know, maybe 4 weeks, 8 weeks ago now. My wife and I went out there, and some folks wanted me to give a talk about this thing. And what I saw is that people in Cardiff, Wales, London, England, Frankfurt, Germany, Amsterdam, Netherlands, Madrid, Barcelona, Lisbon, all were showing me how they had pictures of George Floyd and the protests that they had, and how in Munich they were marching down the street and they had George Floyd's image. And I just remember when I was younger, people had this image of one person standing in front of those tanks at Tiananmen Square. People will remember that image. People who don't speak Mandarin, people who've never been to China, people who don't know even, you know, where Tiananmen Square is in China, know that picture, and they're like, this is what state repression is. And now, Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd is the image of state repression around the world. We have to do something about it. We can't let that image stand.
Right.
And it would be fitting and proper if we could get our act together and pass a suite of city ordinances in Minneapolis which signal to the world that we learned something.
Right.
We're not going to just hope for the best.
Right.
Wait around until the next tragedy happens. You know, if you got Justine Ruchtek in a bathrobe, shot down and killed. You know, and I'm one person with one opinion. I thought it was altogether proper for Mohammed Noor to be prosecuted. You know, people said, well, the first time you prosecute somebody is with a white lady and a black officer. That might be the fact, but he's not on trial because he's a black officer. He's on trial because he killed this woman.
Right.
And you can't just say that it's okay because we haven't done it before. And now we have shown that, you know, Chauvin's racial background is not going to protect him from accountability. And so now maybe we can go forward. But I'll tell you this, a lot of people have said to me, oh, great, y'all convicted that guy. I'm like, man, that's one case.
One case.
That's just one case. It's not, that doesn't change anything. We even had some folks who were dead set against supporting any sort of systemic change, you know, giving us congratulations. I'm like, don't congratulate me, vote for the bill.
Right.
You know,
That's right.
if you want to truly thank me, vote for the bill.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Otherwise, it's empty, you know?
I was about to go to another question. I got to get to those people on that.
Sure. If we got some folks, yeah.
I know we have some people who got questions. I want to get to them. Seth, do we have some questions?
Am I on? We have 6 questions online. To begin with, Attorney General, do you know about police academies around the country? Are any doing a good job at producing the kinds of graduates that we would want to hire here? And this comes from Mary.
Yes. The answer is yes. Camden County Police Department is doing a pretty good job. Now, I don't want to say that Camden's perfect. One of the ways that they've reduced deadly force encounters with police is they have reduced the unnecessary encounters. You know, a lot of the low-level traffic stops that, you know, they said, you know, maybe we don't need to stop people for a air freshener hanging from the rear view. Right. And if we do, they put cameras up around the city and take a picture, and then they just send you a ticket in the mail. Right. And so they've done that, but they've had a tremendous success. And here's the thing, not just have they reduced deadly force encounters with police, they've also reduced violent crime. They got more guns off the street. Same thing for Newark, New Jersey. Folks ask me, who do you think we should talk to about making change? Call Ross Baraka, the mayor of Newark, New Jersey.
I went to college with him, by the way.
Yeah, good guy.
Yes.
Good guy.
Yes.
And in 2020, they had 0 deadly force encounters with police. 0. Not even a shot fired. And they paid out no money in police brutality cases. Now, that's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, they can afford to do some things, you know, if they keep on doing that. And then Ithaca, New York has been making some real progress. There are folks doing things. And I tell you, look, everybody wants to be respected. I've done some studying on why people choose the policing profession. One of the top reasons given, and I hope somebody fact checks me on this, is they want to help people.
Yes.
They want to help people. Let them help people, right?
Right.
But we've got people, but I'll say this about training in police academies. It's one of those necessary but insufficient things. It's necessary, but it's insufficient.
It is, exactly.
Because you got to look at the police culture that you have. If you have a police culture where N-bombs are dropped by officers, and we know that they are, where you have an officer who would say something like, well, those people got to be white because there's no burning and looting going over there. That's actually on tape, spoken by a member of law enforcement in Minneapolis within the last 2 years. When you got that kind of stuff, you train some rookie and you put them in, and what are they going to hear on the first day? Yeah, that's what they told you in the academy. Here's how you really do this job. And then if you don't conform to that culture, then you're out. You're not invited to the barbecue. You're not included. You're not brought asked, and you're just sort of out there. You're ostracized. Yeah. We've got to create a culture where it's cool, where it's accepted to do the right thing, to help people, to watch your language, to not disrespect the people you're paid to serve and protect. And there's a premium and a benefit to demonstrating respect for the people who you're supposed to protect. But the answer is yeah. There are some positive stories out there.
Would you please, Judy wants to know if you could discuss what you know about some pay differentials between officers in Minneapolis and then elsewhere in Minnesota, and then how that relates to low numbers and current officers.
I got to admit that I'm just not up on that issue.
Okay.
I just don't know the issue. I'm sure that...
You don't know everything?
But I think it's worth exploring, so tell Judy I think that she's on to something, but I'm no good on that one.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Karen, and this is something from my own point of view, that it gets asked a lot and I think gets answered a lot, but yet is never answered in a way that at least I can even help answer again. And she says, who has the authority to fire bad officers? And why isn't that happening when an officer is the subject of multiple complaints?
This is a good question.
That's a good question.
So, start out with the fact that the chief has the authority to fire the bad officer. But there is a union contract in place,
Right.
which says that if there's a discharge or any adverse discipline, then that's a grievable thing, and the officer can opt to have that arbitrated by a neutral. Now, there are two different perspectives here. Let's talk about it from the arbitrator's point of view for a moment. Some arbitrators are saying we don't mind upholding the discharge, but there's a lot of uneven application. So you want me to fire this guy, but the guy who did the same thing, you didn't fire him. And so you're asking me to discharge somebody, but you haven't fired people in similar situations. So there is a need for the police leadership to really dig in and have some equal some consistent discipline, and that will allow you to get rid of people because then the arbitrators will be able to say, okay, well, this is what happens when you do that. Right.
Consequences.
Now that's from their perspective. There's another perspective, and here's that perspective. That perspective says that, look, I'm an arbitrator. I like arbitrating, and it's lucrative, and it helps feed my family. And if I'm firing too many officers, they're not going to pick me. Because what happens is like, okay, here's 3 arbitrators, and then you get rid of one, we'll get rid of one, and we'll go with who's left. Who does that one who's left tend to be? The one least perceived to be by. So the baby splitter is the one who you end up with.
Right.
You know, the one who's going to split the baby all the time. The one who's going to uphold discipline. The target of discipline is like, not that one, right? And then the one who always is on the side of the cop, you know, is like, well, no, we don't want that guy because he's not fair. And so you end up with the baby splitter. And so, you know, that's sort of the way that it goes. So, I mean, the people who don't want to change I think the real answer is in bargaining and collective bargaining negotiation. You just have to say, look, where there is misconduct, excessive force, where there's dishonesty, that's mine. And you can appeal it to the council. And that's your due process. Because they got election certificates. And they're accountable to they're accountable. The problem with the arbitrators, nobody knows who it is. Nameless, faceless, completely unaccountable. And if they want to keep getting picked, they can't offend either side very often. So I think those are some thoughts.
Just to follow up on that, this is a consistent thing that keeps coming up. You just brought it up with the arbitrators. There's a different but a similar situation that occurs with prosecutors too.
Yeah.
And what it suggests to me that we have these situations where the police power is such that the other agents or organizations that can be helpful in dealing with police misconduct are usually have a real relationship with the police and don't want to interrupt it.
Yeah, and I think that here's the thing. I believe that you're right and that is true, but let's just say it's not. The perception is that it is, right? And so justice is not justice, it's the perception of justice. You got to have both the perception and the actuality, in my view, in order for people to respect the system. So I think that, you know, we've got to have a situation where we have independence in investigation and prosecution. Got to be both. You know, there's got to be independence in investigation and prosecution. And so I think it's a good thing that, you know, Mike Freeman, John Choi, others have sent cases out and sent them to other jurisdictions so nobody believes that, you know, this is just folks all in the system looking
Looking out for each other.
after their backs of their buddies.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You've talked about this, you've touched on it a few times, and Anne asks about arbitration, which you've answered, but then specifically about union. Wondering if you could give more flesh to the conversation about where the union sits in this.
Well, let me tell you, the history of police unions across the United States is one where I think it can safely be said most unions are anti-reform. You do have a group called Noble, which is the black police union, and they've been pro-reform. But in general, police unions are not in favor of reform. Bob Kroll was 100% against any kind of reform. But you have a new head of the police union who I think we should give her a chance. I think her name is Schmidt. And I think that I've heard some very positive things. I don't know what kind of, police union president she's going to be, but I do think that I've heard some things, reasons to think that you might have a willing partner to negotiate some things. And that's a good, I don't know yet, it's too early to tell, but I've heard this from a few sources. So, hey, we got to take some chances.
Right.
One thing we can't do is say, I will not talk to that person.
Yeah. The only thing that leads me to understand, the police unions seem to be an organization on a whole order of difference. And the reason I say that is police unions are considered a public sector union. Right. And yet they are carved out from all the other public sector unions, including firefighters union. And not only is it happen, I guess I'm wrestling with how is it that the police union somehow distinguishes itself out of all the other public sector unions, including the firefighters union. No other union has that kind of hold over municipal leaders and our legal structure. It is so striking to me that somehow it becomes a public sector union when it needs to be, but it acts wholly other. Yeah, interesting thing about police unions, they have a long history. So I'll just say again, our country, held people in bondage for 250 some years, Jim Crow for another 100, and there've been disparities in every aspect of life for the last 60. That's the way it is, that's the story. And police were called upon to maintain the social order, Yeah.
That's the job that they had. So, when John Lewis got arrested, he didn't get arrested by a firefighter or a baker.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
It was the sheriff. It was the police. It was that's who did it. And so, those unions I think really were given a wider berth I think they really were given space to do what they wanted to do.
We have a question here.
So you've addressed, is this on? Yes. You've addressed police academies, and you've addressed a little bit how to get rid of a bad cop. Since watching the dash cam footage of Philando Castile's murder, and everybody who watched it knows what it was, I was left with the question, who approved Geronimo Yanez as an officer who, of all the things you can see in that video, which is horrific, is that man is completely unfit. And how did someone say yes to that? And does that person who said yes to that ever get fired, prosecuted, please?
I gotta admit, I don't know. I wish I knew more about that. I've studied that case. I've studied the trial. But what I have not studied is, his academy records. How he does seem extremely unnerved by what ought to be a routine traffic stop. He's no longer a police officer, by the way. But you do wonder, how did this guy get through the system? So, because he didn't seem like he could handle the stress. So.
Yeah. Do we have another?
Yeah, we have a few more. Could you talk a bit about interagency collaboration from your viewpoint? Mary asks us about the role of Hennepin County in Minneapolis, especially with respect to mental health, working with police.
Well, you know, since there's been many more conversations, I'm not an expert on Hennepin County. We got some folks who know quite a bit about Hennepin County. But I can say that we've got to have more interagency collaboration around a range of things. We have an inadequate response around, in my view, housing and mental health and chemical dependency. So we need to coordinate and operate much more effectively together. And that's one more reason why I'm in favor of a consolidated, comprehensive approach.
What are the barriers to that? Why is it everybody is overworked and there's not enough people to do collaboration, to work together takes extra
Yeah, you
effort.
need people to coordinate you, right?
Yeah.
That's a job, is what your point is.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think it's some combination of leadership, which is vision, and then also just, you know, human resource shortages. Nobody has tons of people to give away, right?
Right.
And so who will do it? That's why, you know, somebody said, I don't know who came up with it, you know, you don't want to waste a crisis.
Right.
You don't want, because crisis is a moment when you can make big changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why Martin Luther King actually went out and created a crisis.
Yes, I love that phrase.
Right.
Create crisis.
He created a crisis. He's like, okay, we're just gonna sit here for a while and see how y'all deal with it. And so so this is a moment, we're still in the shadow of certainly of the murder of George Floyd and even the election.
Yes.
No reason why we cannot use this moment to say, let's do something,
Yes.
right? And it won't be long before we're going to be back in another election cycle where other politicians are going to see it to their advantage to preserve the status quo.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and you know, we already know that you're going to get some 1968 Nixonian war on crime rhetoric.
Yes, yes.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming. And you begin to wonder how many times we're going to go for this, right?
Right.
One time we got Nixon. That didn't work out so good. And then the next time we had the war on drugs. And that didn't work out so good. So these politicians who always, their first impulse is to incarcerate, jail, more cops, more prisons, you know, they say, you know, you got to be tough on crime. And I reject the idea of being tough on crime. I think you need to be smart on crime.
Smart on crime.
Right. And of course you got to be tough with the tough, but you got to be sensitive with the people who got other kind of problems. Right? With folks who are homeless, with folks who are struggling with addiction. I mean, they don't need a nightstick. They need a program to get clean. And so the fact that we think that every problem is a nail and every solution is a hammer, what we're saying is there's a lot of tool in the toolbox. Let's pick the right one for the right problem.
Yeah. Mr. Attorney General, I have said and I've complained even before I moved to the Twin Cities that policing has become an all-purpose policy answer, and it is the one go-to, especially when you get to poor neighborhoods that need investment, real investment in housing, in education, in economic development.
You're so right.
Every job I've had in politics, in ministry, has been an argument for investment. But you said it, my fear is every cycle someone is going to come up with, it's more police and more money for being tough on crime.
And like, even if you do more police, doing what? Right?
Right.
So if we don't think more intensely about how we preserve safety, that should be the goal.
Right.
Safety is the goal. That's what we want to do, is have safety. That's what we're trying to achieve. We're not trying to achieve more police. That's a way to get to a goal. But what we're trying to do is have safe communities. If you don't change the way we're doing policing, we had 3 people on top of George Floyd. What are we going to do? Have 5 now? I mean, let's think about what we're doing, how we deploy the resources that we have for a overall safer community. And I think that's what we need to think about. That's what people are. But we're in a moment where, politicians demagogue crime. They just do. And, the poor crime victims, because they're out there, so often their thoughts are like, well, I need this person to acknowledge the pain they caused me and my family.
Right.
I need this person to talk about the harm they caused. Somebody passed that store a bad bill. George Floyd may not have known it was fake, but somebody must have, because they made it. Let's deal with that person, right? But let's figure out, but that's not a gun in a bag. That's somebody who's smart about tracing money flows, and that's somebody who knows how to, has another skill set.
Right.
Still safety though, safety of your property,
Right.
But here we are, we're in a moment, coming up on midterms, and you can already see it, you can already hear it. And what will happen? Will our society be better off? Were we better off by incarcerating more people than any country in the world, including China, and we're only 1/3 the size of China, right? Are we better off? Is anyone really, do people take less drugs now? I mean, we've got to ask ourselves some questions. And the people who are just trying to win an election by appealing to our amygdala, our immediate fear response, they don't want a conversation. They just want an answer now. Just tell me now, something to make me feel safe immediately. I'm like, this is a deeper social problem. I'll tell you this, look at a community where you don't have any community violence, violence committed by individuals, nor do you have much in the way of state violence. Look at a community that doesn't have that very often, where it's a rarity. Now ask yourself about the investments in that community. Are there investments in that community? What are we doing about education in those communities? What are we doing about lighting and public works in those communities? What are we doing about educational quality in those communities? You don't hear about many police brutality or violent crimes in Edina. You know what also you have in Edina? A lot of investment.
A lot of investment.
You have a lot of investment. You have pools, you have sports, you have big sports, you have theaters where kids can learn how to do their Shakespeare. You have investment. You have 2 teachers in a classroom of 29 kids. You have investment. And what do we not have in the neighborhood where you see a lot of violence and even states violence? A lack of investment.
Yeah.
You see dilapidated homes. You see slum landlords. You see, unkept roads. You see light fixtures not taken care of. You see garbage not picked up regularly. You see, overcrowded classrooms. You see, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Did you say you have one more question? We have time for one more.
We are right at the end of our time, but this one comes back to you, Attorney General. Johanna wants to know, we've talked a lot about what can be done broadly. What can your office do to change the policy and the systemic side of all of this? Where do you, in your elected position, sit in this conversation?
Well, there's a lot of things we can do, and we're trying to do them. One of the first things we did is we convened people. Me and John Harrington convened people. We issued a report, Reducing Deadly Force Encounters with Police. I would recommend people read it. It was comprehensive. It invited everybody involved, and it was a year before the crisis. Then we can be a prosecutor who can offer independent prosecutorial services that give independence to the prosecutorial decision-making and process. Then we can, work on issues of training. We represent, the board of the post board, Police Officers Standard and Training Board. They're trying to work on licensure to make sure that, that they use the licensing system to make sure that officer conduct is at its best level. We're advising them. We can go to the legislature and offer our experience. I can come to forums like this and try to, raise public awareness and answer questions from citizens. Mm-hmm. So if there's something else Johanna thinks I should be doing, I'd love to hear it.
But another thing I know you've done, you were responsible for really going forcefully at that prosecution of Derek Chauvin. I'm just not sure. I'm not trying to butter you up here. I'm just not sure that would have happened if we didn't have your willingness to take that risk and to push it. So I just want to point that out.
You know what I'll say, Reverend? We didn't ask for the case, didn't particularly want it.
Right.
But once the governor and the county attorney, Mike Freeman, said we could use your help here, what are we going to say?
Right.
No, it might not be good for my political career. Give me a break. Mm-hmm. Nope, we just did what we stepped up to the plate and did the best we could. And thank God it turned out pretty well.
Well, I appreciate it. We are at time. I do just want, we're at time, but just one last thing for you to have the last word. Is there anything we don't know you think we ought to know? I'm not trying to make news, but I do want to give you that last opportunity. If there's something that our viewers...
You know what, the thing that I think you know everything that is needed. But what I want to say, though, is that we still have a moment as a city to do some of the things that we agree on. We decided that we weren't going to do certain things on November 2nd. Fine. But let's do some things we agree on. And then let's go back to your point and make a decision that in this richest country in the history of the world, that we're going to invest in everyone. Yes. So like people, you and I are about the same age. It was common for people in our parents to have like 4 or 5 kids. Yes. I don't know how many siblings you got.
A lot. I got 14.
Well, 14. I think you've just made my point. I have 4 siblings. There's 5 of us. Uh-huh. Our people who our next generation, people who are our kids' age, they are having 2 kids or 1.
Yeah.
So what that means is that the society that used to be able to say there's certain people we don't need and don't need to train, now it needs to train everyone.
Yeah.
Now it can't say we're going to leave the vast brilliance, intelligence, and genius in North Minneapolis right there, locked up in that little girl's head. We're not going to develop her talent.
Right.
But now, as we have fewer people, and as every country is getting fewer people, Japan is getting older, not having many babies. Russia, same thing. Europe, same thing. We're not going to, Latin America will not be able to send us all their people. They're going to need them, right?
Right.
We are simply going to have to say as a society that we're going to develop the talent of everybody. We're not going to just ignore the abilities of human beings who can help answer the most pressing problems of our time, like climate change, like cancers, like healthcare, like how we get along, like how we build a multiracial society that observes the constitutional rights of every person. This is a doable thing. And it's important for us in the moment to understand that there are powerful forces pulling us away from our multiracial democracy. They don't want it. They don't want to see it. They're against it. A la January 6th, for example, waving around Confederate flags, T-shirts that say Camp Auschwitz and stuff like that. There are people out there like that. And so what we need to do is the people who care about multiracial democracy, inclusive society, everybody counts, everybody matters. What the kind of things that this church is known for, we need to be a little bit more robust in our defense of inclusion, talent lies in all humanity, not just some, and develop it and insist on developing it. So that's not particularly, everybody kind of senses that, but I just want to leave with that.
Well, thank you so much, the Honorable Keith Ellison, Attorney General of Minnesota. Thank you all for joining us, and look for more conversations coming in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you.